The Louisiana Purchase. The morning light over Washington City arrived soft and steady, like a calm voice before an important conversation. In 1803 the United States was still young. The country hugged the Atlantic coast and stretched only as far west as the Mississippi River. Beyond that wide current lay a region so large and thinly mapped that many Americans described it with simple words: the West. Families, traders, and riverboat crews looked across the water and wondered what their future there might be. President Thomas Jefferson watched these questions closely. He was thoughtful and careful by nature. He liked to gather facts before making big decisions. He read reports from farmers, merchants, and diplomats. He knew that the port of New Orleans, where the Mississippi River met the Gulf of Mexico, was the key to Western trade. If American crops could reach that port, they could reach the world. If the port closed, the young nation's western settlements would be choked like a river blocked by fallen trees. For many years France had claimed the land called Louisiana, then Spain controlled it, and then in secret it passed back to France under a treaty known as San Ildefonso. This transfer was not widely known at first, but rumors reached American ears. When Spain briefly shut down the right of deposit at New Orleans, the right to store goods there before shipping them, panic spread along the river valleys. Pioneers feared their corn, pork, and flour would pile up uselessly on the banks. Jefferson understood that a single decision in a distant capital could place a hard hand on life in Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Ohio country. Across the ocean, France was led by Napoleon Bonaparte. He dreamed of power in Europe and in the Americas. At first he planned to rebuild a French empire in the West, supplied by the sugar island of Saint-Domingue in the Caribbean. But people on that island fought for their freedom in a long and fierce revolution. Disease struck French troops. Ships failed. The Caribbean plans collapsed. Napoleon faced rising wars in Europe and needed money. Suddenly his thoughts about the vast, distant Louisiana territory began to change. Jefferson sent two men to France to discuss American concerns. Robert R. Livingston was already there as minister. James Monroe, a trusted friend, was sent as a special envoy. Their instructions were modest: try to buy New Orleans and maybe West Florida. The goal was practical, not grand. Securing the port would protect American trade. No one in Washington expected what would happen next. In Paris, Livingston and Monroe met with French officials who surprised them. Instead of haggling over a single city, the French asked a larger question: would the United States like to purchase all of Louisiana? The territory stretched from the Mississippi River westward toward distant mountains and northward into vast plains. It covered an area so large that few could picture it clearly. The diplomats blinked, paused, and asked for the terms. The price would be $15 million. It was a large sum for a young nation, but the offer included New Orleans and a doorway to the western rivers. The American envoys thought about the farmers who sent flatboats down the Mississippi. They thought about the chance to control their own trade and to open paths for science and survey. They also thought about time. The offer might not last. Messages took weeks to cross the ocean. If they waited for a perfect answer from home, the chance could vanish like a boat slipping around a bend. They signed the agreement. When news reached the United States, it moved like the river itself, slow in some places, swift in others, picking up more voices as it went. Some people cheered at once. Some doubted. Could the Constitution, which did not say exactly how to buy foreign land, allow such a purchase? Could the nation afford the cost? What responsibilities came with governing people who had not asked to join the Union? These were fair questions. Jefferson, who loved clear legal steps, felt the weight of them. Yet he also saw the size of the opportunity and the safety it would bring to the Mississippi Valley. He decided that the treaty power, used to make agreements with other nations, could carry the purchase. Congress debated and then approved the treaty and the funds. The Senate gave its consent that fall. Papers were signed in New Orleans to transfer the city, and in St. Louis a simple ceremony took place the next spring. Flags changed. Spanish colors came down, French colors rose briefly, then the stars and stripes replaced them. The rituals were short. The meaning was long. An enormous land had changed hands peacefully. The Louisiana Purchase nearly doubled the size of the United States. The new territory included deep forests, high grasslands, winding rivers, and towns where French and Spanish speakers had lived for generations. It was also home to many native nations who had their own lands, trade networks, laws, and stories. The purchase did not erase those nations or their rights. It changed which distant capital claimed the ultimate title to the soil. The United States would now have to face the hard questions of how to live beside, trade with, and negotiate with the peoples who already called the land home. Jefferson wanted to learn about the new territory in a careful way. Even before the treaty was sealed, he had been planning a scientific and diplomatic expedition. He chose his private secretary, Meriwether Lewis, to lead it, and Lewis invited William Clark to share command. Together they recruited a small group known as the Corps of Discovery. Their mission was simple to say but large to carry out: ascend the Missouri River, find a practical route to the Pacific Ocean if one existed, study plants and animals, map the land, and build friendly ties with native nations. The Corps left from near St. Louis in the spring of 1804. Their boats moved against the Missouri's strong current. Oars dipped and rose. Poles pushed against the riverbed. Men walked the banks and hauled the craft forward with ropes. Days were long but organized. Each evening they made camp, cooked simple meals, and wrote in journals. They recorded the shape of the river, the height of bluffs, the presence of sandbars, and the behavior of wildlife. They described prairies that seemed to roll without end and cottonwoods that glowed pale in the dusk. As they moved north and west, the Corps met many native nations, the Osage, Otto, Missouria, Yankton, and Teton Sioux, Mandan, and Hidatsa, and many others. The expedition carried peace medals and small gifts. Lewis and Clark spoke through interpreters, explained that the United States now claimed the lands of Louisiana, and asked for trade and friendship. The meetings were sometimes warm, sometimes tense. Leaders on both sides weighed words with care. The expedition survived a hard first winter by building Fort Mandan near the villages of the Mandan and Hidatsa. There they repaired boats, mended clothing, and learned more about the country ahead. One of the most important members to join the expedition was a young Shoshone woman, Sacagawea. With her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, she traveled with the Corps and helped guide them through difficult country. She spoke several languages and recognized landmarks in the mountains. Her presence, with her infant son cradled against her, often signaled to other nations that the group came in peace. Her work, steady and quiet, made a large and lasting difference. What the Corps saw became part of the nation's shared picture: herds of bison darkening the horizon, grizzly bears that stood tall, prairie dogs popping from burrows like quick sparks, and rivers that forked and braided like loose ribbons. They also learned about limits. The imagined easy waterway from the Atlantic to the Pacific did not exist. The Missouri ended not in a gentle pass but in the hard stone of the Rocky Mountains. The men had to carry boats and supplies, trade for horses, and climb. They learned to read the sky for weather and to set realistic goals for each day. Meanwhile, life in the purchased territory adjusted step by steady step. In New Orleans, courts and councils shifted to American forms. French and Spanish customs did not vanish overnight. Languages mixed in markets. Catholic churches rang their bells as they always had. Farmers who tilled small plots near the city watched new officials learn local ways. Up the river in St. Louis and beyond, fur traders continued their circuits, now carrying licenses from a different government. Some were excited about the new rules. Some were cautious. Most continued doing what they knew, moving along river paths that had guided trade for generations. The purchase raised questions about slavery in the new lands. Enslaved people already labored in parts of Louisiana, especially near New Orleans and along the lower Mississippi. As Americans moved west, arguments grew over whether slavery would spread. These questions would not be settled in 1803. They would stretch across decades, shaping politics and, sadly, leading toward future conflict. The purchase, for all its promise, carried forward old problems even as it opened new space. Along the eastern seaboard, people sat with maps and traced their fingers over blank spaces that now had names like Upper Louisiana or Northern Plains. Newspapers printed letters from travelers and speeches from Congress. Some writers warned against moving too fast. They asked whether a large republic could truly stay united. Others argued that room to breathe would ease tensions, not increase them. Families made their own quiet decisions, whether to stay or to join a wagon train, whether to sell a small farm and start again near a different river, whether to trust the unknown or cling to the known. In France, Napoleon counted the money and turned his attention back to European wars. In Spain, leaders frowned at the size of the sale and worried about their remaining lands in North America. In Britain, officials watched, noting that a nation they had once ruled had just taken a very large step. In all these capitals, people read the same sentence and then argued over what it meant: the United States had bought Louisiana. The core of discovery reached the Pacific in late 1805 after climbing and descending mountains, following the Columbia River, and feeling rain that seemed to settle into their clothes for weeks. They built Fort Clatsop near the coast and spent the winter preparing to return. They were tired and thin but alive. On the way back they split into smaller groups to explore more territory and then met again at the Missouri. They arrived in St. Louis in September 1806 to the sound of cheers. Their journals and maps became a treasure of knowledge for the country. Jefferson read their reports with great attention. He loved details about plants and animals. He also considered the diplomatic notes. He knew the United States would need long patience to live alongside so many nations in the West. He believed fair trade and clear agreements would help. He also believed that independent farmers, each with a patch of land, could form the backbone of a free country. The purchase gave space for that vision. Whether the country would use that space wisely remained an open question. Years passed. New states were carved from the territory. Roads were built. Steamboats churned brown water into white foam. Towns grew around river crossings and junctions. Some families prospered. Some met hardship. Native nations negotiated, resisted, or moved under pressure, each choice heavy with cost. Treaties were written and often broken. The story of the purchase became braided with many other stories, of migration, invention, conflict, and care. Through all of this, the quiet facts at the heart of 1803 stayed simple. A young nation chose to seek security for its western trade. An empire, pressed by war and illness, chose to sell. A treaty was signed. Money was exchanged. Flags were lowered and raised. An inland continent that had belonged to one European power now belonged to another nation that had been born only a few decades earlier. These are plain steps, yet they altered millions of lives. If you close your eyes now and picture the land as it was then, you can see slow rivers looping through tall grass. You can see cottonwoods standing like sentries along the banks. You can see a line of wagons moving at walking speed, a day's travel measured by the sun and not by miles. You can see a village of earth lodges warm in winter and cool in summer, smoke lifting into clear air. You can see a French-speaking family in New Orleans stirring a pot of gumbo while neighbors stop at the door. You can see a trader on the upper Missouri counting beaver pelts as ice forms along the edge of the water. All of these scenes lived together within a space that, on a map, carried one new name. The Louisiana Purchase is sometimes summarized with a number, 828,000 square miles. But a number cannot show a sunrise, or the hush before a storm on the plains, or the relief on a farmer's face when a flatboat slips safely into the current that will carry his year's work to market. A number cannot show Sacagawea pointing out a landmark that means friendly people are near, or a mapmaker bending close to trace a river's true shape. A number cannot capture the quiet hope of a country that believed it had found room to grow in dignity and peace. When people today visit St. Louis, they can stand by the Mississippi and watch barges move like patient animals. They can look up at a stainless arch that marks the idea of a gateway. When they visit New Orleans, they can stand where the river widens and the air turns soft and salty. They can hear music that mixes continents. They can eat food that tells the history of trade in a single bite. The purchase does not feel like a distant event in those places. It feels like a tide that still pushes and pulls. At night, when the air is quiet and the room is dark, imagine the corridor of 1803 again. A courier rides hard with a pouch of papers. A clerk sands a signature dry. In Washington, Jefferson lifts his eyes from a letter and thinks about the Constitution and about farmers up the Ohio. In Paris, a minister seals an envelope while sounds from the street drift through a window. In New Orleans, a harbor worker coils a rope as a different flag flutters above the fort. The world has shifted, but gently, like a door opening on oiled hinges. The purchase did not answer every question. It asked new ones. How far would the United States go? How would it treat the peoples who already lived in the West? How would it balance profit with honor, speed with care, strength with fairness? The years that followed would test these questions, again and again. Some answers would be good. Some would not. The land has room for memory of both kindness and mistake, and the story of the purchase includes both. Still, in the simple frame of a calm bedtime story, we can rest with the steady parts. We can remember that patient diplomacy matters, that chances sometimes appear when plans change, and that decisions made with care can open paths for learning. We can remember that exploration is best when it includes respect and listening, and that maps are not just lines but promises to return what we find in better words. Let the Mississippi roll in your thoughts now, broad and brown and unhurried. See a flatboat tied to a cottonwood root. Hear frogs begin their evening chorus. In the distance a dog barks, then settles. Overhead the sky holds more stars than anyone can count, and the land below is wide enough to lie down in and feel safe. The United States, a young country, found new room in 1803. It promised to use that room well. It did not always keep the promise, but the promise itself still has power. It is the promise that people can make a wider place for freedom, learning, and work done with care. In that promise, let your breathing slow. The rivers of the new land keep their pace. The grass bends and rises in a wind that is older than any treaty. The mountains wait in the west like quiet teachers. Tomorrow holds its own miles, but tonight is for rest. Think of the flags that rose and fell, the pens that paused, the boats that pulled against the current and then turned with it for the long ride home. The Louisiana Purchase began as a negotiation across an ocean. It became a map drawn across a continent, and a steady, patient step in a story that continues.